Hi, I'm David Dodge. Welcome to Part 8 in our COP26 Tiny Explainers series. One Canadian premier famously called COP26 a gabfest that doesn't need one more politician, while Greta Thunberg called it a greenwash festival where the key topic is blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, the vast majority of countries attend COP, and the pressure is now on to emerge from the conference with a plan that could at least conceptually contain climate change to 1.5 degrees. We've already heard some exciting announcements and some underwhelming announcements. Eddy Peréz is a COP veteran with the Climate Action Network from Canada, and Mitchell Beer of the Energy Mix talked to him to get some insights into the inside workings of the COP conference.
Good day, and welcome to this edition of COP26 Tiny Explainers. I'm Mitchell Beer, publisher of the Energy Mix, and I'm speaking with Eddy Peréz, International Climate Diplomacy Manager at Climate Action Network Canada. He's also one of the most knowledgeable people on the planet when it comes to climate finance and the process of COP negotiations. Eddy has been following the negotiations constantly, closely at COP26, and he's connecting with us from the conference venue in Glasgow. So as we've been saying all week, just a production note that the audio could be pretty bad, but hang in, because you really want to hear every word he has to say. Eddy, we had a new negotiating text Wednesday morning or late Tuesday night, depending on your time zone. Before we get to what's in it, for people who've never been to a COP, what is all this about texts and cover decisions and non-papers and stock takes? And how does all of that help get climate change under control?
We are certainly, according to science, not in a good place. We have an inadequate effort that is leading us towards global warming above 2.5 degrees Celsius, which is disastrous for the ecosystems, for people, for the economy.
So what happens at this late stage of the COP conference?
I think what matters is to remind us that the climate crisis has no borders and requires deep cooperation from all countries, from communities, people, particularly those who are actually experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis in a much more amplified manner than others. What we try to do in this space is to get countries to work together and to uphold their responsibility.
So if we're trying to stop the blah blah, how's it been going this week as the negotiations move toward their finish?
So, the sessions here in Glasgow, it's always the traditional 2 weeks of COP, and the first piece of that week is a moment where heads of governments come and they deliver, bring in some new statements and issues.
Those heads of state have come, made their big promises, and now they're gone.
And then you have the second week, which is much more when we go deep into the technical negotiations, look back to the things that some have promised and ask ourselves, have they delivered?
Then it gets down to the nitty-gritty.
And then, now we're going into the end of the technical and much more into the ministerial. So we're going to have 3 days, intense 3 days of negotiation to try to really make sure that as much as possible we leave Glasgow with a recognition that these countries are able to tackle the climate emergency like we should. We have the resources and the science. Here, the test is about political willingness.
So at this point, and just recognizing that things are literally changing by the minute where you are right now, what does it look like we're going to be able to get out of this conference, and what are the main sticking points right now?
Yeah, so essentially what we're trying right now is to accelerate the process in which all of us commit to keeping 1.5 within reach. So I think that is certainly the main objective of this convention, is to give ourselves a global mandate where we don't focus on limiting global warming to 2 degrees. 2 degrees is too much, it's too dangerous. We actually focus on accelerating action this decade to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and protect ourselves from harm from the climate crisis.
The UK presidency of this COP has put out an early draft text which seems to suggest there's more work to do.
For a country like Canada, that means, putting forward a new NDC, new national determined contribution, putting forward more money, putting forward science-compatible climate pledges, investments, and phasing out fossil fuels. So the text so far has a couple of important hooks, but we're not there yet.
Eddy, as you know, we were following a story yesterday where the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers held a press conference. Interestingly, apart from their usual conversation about what they want to do to decarbonize by 2050, when, as you say, it's a 2030 target that matters right now, curiously, they were casting Canadian oil and gas as the key to ending energy poverty for something like 580 million people in Africa, when, as Dale Marshall from Environmental Defense pointed out, people from Africa and from other developing regions have been pleading for a fossil fuel phase out all the way through this conference. You've been close to the negotiations. Have you seen, and the other point, of course, is that we learned earlier this week that if the fossil fuel industry were a country, they would have the largest delegation to the COP. So you've been close to the negotiations. Have you seen any indication of fossil influence on some of the incredibly important issues that you're laying out?
Well, I mean, if they have 500 people here, I am sure they're busy. So it's certainly, it is something that is of concern. They come in big numbers. They were not invited as industry, and they decided to come in with badges from other groups that are in this place.
Perez says oil industry executives come to the conference wearing badges not of the industry, but of nations and other groups.
It is definitely a challenge. It will be a challenge at this COP in particular, because this time, in a decision text, the word phasing out fossil fuels, subsidies, is found there. So that means that there are countries calling for it. And that means that this is going to put pressure on those countries who don't want that don't want that kind of a radical action that science is demanding. So I do expect that in the next coming days, it is going to become a very difficult battle, very difficult diplomatic battle. But it is one that many here have the resolve to do so, because we know there is no keeping 1.5 within reach if we continue to expand the fossil fuel industry, to continue to finance it, and if they continue to be left off the hook like we've done for the past 3 decades.
Thank you so much for this. Eddy Peréz from Climate Action Network Canada. Hang in there over the next few days. This has been the latest in our series of COP26 Tiny Explainer broadcasts. You can find more of our explainers on the Green Energy Futures YouTube page and on our website at theenergymix.com. Eddy Peréz, thanks once again for joining us.
Once again, our sincere apologies for the sound quality. Undoubtedly, the bandwidth at COP is being tested to the limit. We hope this brings you just a tiny bit of insight into the machinations of how COPs work. This is just a sampler of what happens when you bring 40,000 delegates, activists, lobbyists, politicians, technicians, business people, and social justice people together to talk about the biggest issue of modern times. And while the media will want a simple pass-fail mark for COP26, the reality is there will be an array of wins and setbacks. The one measure everyone's looking at is whether what's on the table can contain climate change to 1.5 degrees. This is not looking good as of today. Thanks to Mitchell Beer of the Energy Mix and Eddy Peréz of the Canadian Climate Action Network for this tiny explanation of COP26. Thank you for listening, and follow our COP26 Tiny Explainers at theenergymix.com and GreenEnergyFutures.ca. For COP26 Tiny Explainers, I'm David Dodge.
The climate change.